Welcome to the Empowered Living Zone, where you can create the life you crave. With me, Dr. A, as a psychologist for over 30 years, a transformational life coach, and an expert in self-empowerment, my life's work has been inspired by the beautifully powerful resilience of the human spirit. We will share stories and successes of people who have not only overcome personal adversity, but have used their traumas and hardships courageously as a springboard into greatness. Create positive transformational shifts on your way to achieving phenomenal success. Get ready to level up as you move beyond the challenging terrain of your life's journey into the empowered living zone. Ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision, the Empowered Living Zone show starts now. Welcome to the Empowered Living Zone, where we explore self-empowerment, personal growth, and the journey to becoming our best selves. I'm Dr. A, your host. In today's episode, we will be discussing the connection between money, mental health, and physical health. We have Dr. Darla Bishop with us to share her story and wisdom about health and money. Dr. Darla, affectionately known as the Finance Sis, is the founder of her own consulting firm based in Lansing, Michigan, and the author of How to Afford Everything. Motivated by her own challenging childhood, Dr. Darla has unique gifts, and it lies in her ability to motivate individuals to transcend limiting beliefs about wealth and cultivate a positive financial mindset. She firmly believes that empowering individuals with financial knowledge is pivotal in creating prosperous and resilient communities. With her down-to-earth and engaging approach to money matters, Dr. Darla's guidance on saving and budgeting has been transformative for countless individuals and families. Her practical advice has empowered them to take charge of their financial well-being, granting them freedom to live life on their own terms. Now, outside of her work as a speaker and a financial coach, Dr. Darla is also a professor of health policy at George Washington University, a director at AmeriHealth Caritas, DC, and she manages a portfolio of her family-owned rental properties. Welcome, Dr. Darla. It's great to
Thank you
see
so
you.
much. Yes, it's good to see you. Thank you for having me on today, Dr. A.
Oh, I am excited. And Darla, I don't know how much you know about me. I know it's fun. This is our first time actually meeting face to face. And my big thing that I get really excited about is, as my intro says, my big thing is about adversity and resilience. And I believe it doesn't matter where we come from. It doesn't matter the hardships that we've experienced. We can let those define us, or we can actually use those in a way that does create some kind of springboard into something greater, right? And I suspect that you have a story to share with us that really lines up with that. And what I would love to do, first of all, I'm really excited about our topic today. And I'm sure there's a lot of listeners that are excited about this, especially with your book about how to afford everything, because I think, money is a big thing for people, and it's a big struggle. And I can tell you from my own personal story, I did experience poverty growing up. And I recognize that even today, that I'm far from that. I still have those tapes in the back of my mind. I still have the narratives in the back of my mind, but about things like, oh my God, you got to hold on to that, or, be careful. I still sometimes catch myself in what I call the poor man mentality. But before we get into this, and I'm sure the listeners are at the edge of their seat because they want to know all the good stuff here. I'd love to hear your story. As I've mentioned, you had your own adversity growing up, and I'm curious what childhood experiences you had that really kind of fueled your life purpose in terms of helping others with their money matters.
Well, the one that I probably talk about the most is when I went away to college, which I wasn't sure I would be able to go because when I was a freshman in high school, my mom went to prison and she was sentenced to 4 years minimum. And we went to live with her sister, who, while loved me as my aunt, we hadn't spent a ton of time together. And once she kind of got us settled and got our room set up, so it'd been a few days of us living with her, I sat down on her bed after my younger siblings went to sleep, and I asked her, will I still be able to go to school? And what I meant is, would I still be able to go to college? And my aunt, who has a GED and was working as a bus driver at the time and successful in her own right, said, well, if you and your mom had a plan for you to go to college, we got time, right? She kind of checked to make sure she knew which grade I was in, because she wasn't exactly sure. We'll get you there. We've got time. We've got time. If that's what you need to do, I know you're smart. Your mom has always been smart, so I'm sure she raised you to be smart. We will figure it out. And so fast forward a few years, when I did get to college, thanks to a sizable scholarship, although I had fully anticipated that I would work, the scholarship allowed me to be a student. Like, what a gift. What a gift to be a student. I thought I was going to be working however many jobs I needed to pay tuition and rent and send money home. And those first couple of semesters, that wasn't the case. I got to join clubs and be with my classmates and party a little and like actually have fun and be on college campus. And the thing that I think really turned something in me was one of my classmates had special permission to park his Range Rover on campus right outside of our dorm. I went to a university that did not have a parking pass system for undergraduates. You couldn't get a parking pass if you were an undergraduate, at least at that time. I don't know the rules now. And so his parents, through whatever magic they worked, got him a staff pass so that he could park his Range Rover right outside of our dorm so he could keep an eye on it or easily get to it. And what amazed me about that, I was like, wait, if he's here with whatever it took him to get here, and I'm here with all the, I can't remember if I can cuss on this show, so we'll say stuff it took me to get here, I can figure the money part out. So I started reading books about money.
So I'm curious, it's interesting to hear just this piece of this, because I'm actually even thinking about my own experience with college. I was in I think a situation that you can probably relate to, Dr. Darla, in the sense of, nobody had gone to college before I did. I did not come from money. There was no plan. I lived in poverty. People in my world, my family, they were thinking about the next meal, not how to get to school. And so, here you get there. And I love the story about the Range Rover, because I'm guessing that you're going, okay, that isn't even nowhere near what my reality is. I'm curious about the translation. What was it about that experience that took you to the place of money? Because it could have been a lot of things. It could have been, I'm not good enough. It could be, I'm not like that. I don't, what's wrong with me? It could have been a lot of different things, but you went down this road. I'm struck by a couple of things. One is, you must have had some sense of personal power, which I'm curious about that. And I'd like to hear about that. But you also went down this idea of, how do I do this so I can be here? I'd love to hear that connection.
So part of it is, regardless of what we went through growing up, all the women in my family were strong, smart, creative, resilient, resourceful people. And so they put that in me. They were like, oh, if you're somewhere, you deserve to be there. So when people talk about, I listened to your episode about imposter syndrome, I'm like, oh, I don't have that. I don't have an ounce of that, because I'm so sure about who I am and what it took me to get where I am, that if I made it into a room, even if I tripped on my way in the door and fell on my face once I walked in, I'm supposed to be in that room.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That is amazing, Dr. Darla. I think that's 3/4 of the battle. It's interesting because the work that I do, and it's funny, I don't know if this will resonate for you. Sometimes I feel like the work that we do in the world is also the work we need to do for ourselves.
Oh,
it's like,
100%.
Does that make sense?
100%. The reason I talk about money all the time is because it's still a thing for me. Just yesterday, I'm working on a problem in my personal life. And I was like, okay, what would the rich version of me, how would the rich version of Darla solve this? Don't let the poor version of Darla solve this. How would the rich version of Darla solve this problem? I have to like literally say it out loud to remind myself that like we can use a different part of our brain to tap
Yeah.
into the solution.
Yeah. You know what I love about the story, and it's interesting because I feel like 3/4 of the battle, like the work that I do with other, and I typically work with women of color that are in leadership roles, and it amazes me that 3/4 of that work is them believing in themselves. You know, they struggle with self-doubt, they struggle with whether or not they deserve a seat at the table, they struggle with whether they know enough. And it's so cool that you're not starting at that place. You're starting at a place. I'm just still taking this in. I'll be honest with you, Dr. Darla. I'm still taking in this idea that what a gift. You know, you grew up in and you experienced poverty, but what a gift I think of wealth and richness and personal power and resilience and this belief that you could do it. I mean, that is 3/4 of the path, isn't it?
At least, because I walk into rooms and I believe that I belong there.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there are people who absolutely belong in rooms and they're there and they're like, I'm not sure I should be here. And I'm like, are you serious? With your background? Like, I'll give you a pep talk, but I don't know why you need one.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, and it gives you so much more room. So you're not expending all this energy just talking yourself into whether you should be there or not. So
No.
instead, you're using your resources in creative ways to get what you want. And so
Yeah.
I'm curious, here you are, you're in school. It sounds like your experience, this it was a pivotal time in your life where you're like, okay, I'm here. I'm here. I deserve to be here. I belong here. Now what do I need to do to make this work? And I'm curious,
Yeah.
like what did you go for? Like what got you down this path of money?
Well, what I also recognize is when I was living with my aunt, after living with my mom for all of my life up until that point, she had a completely different way that she managed her money, the way that she talked about it, the way she thought about it, the way she kept it organized. And I saw that both of them worked, but for different reasons. And then when I went to college, I saw even more ways that money could work and feel and look like. And so, one that for me told me, oh, there isn't just one way. So that's great. That means I can figure out the way that works really well for me. And two, that I also understood that the life I was walking into by virtue of being at a college that was kind of a name brand school, building a network, a community of, I have now have friends with Range Rovers, and that's normal for them, right? Versus like the friends that I left back home in Detroit, right? So, like, okay, so between the education, the people I'm meeting, and the degree I'm going to walk out of here with, my life is going to look really different than the folks who raised me. I'm not going to work in a factory probably. I'm probably not going to work an hourly job. I'm probably going to work a salary. So I need to understand what that even means. I need to understand what a retirement account is because I keep reading about it in the book and I think I'm going to have one of those. And so how will I manage that when the time comes up? So I think part of it is I'm naturally curious. And also as a kid, we watched a lot of Reading Rainbow. And when you're poor, we actually, even though we were poor, my mom had grown up with some means, but then lost those due to the death of a parent at a very young age. And so she was in touch with some of the cultural things that maybe people who live in poverty don't. So we spent a ton of time at the library. So reading was kind of part of the culture of our home, and she found ways to get us into places even if we couldn't afford it. She found ways to do that, and so I saw that resourcefulness in action growing up. So I just kind of repeated those patterns because those were patterns that were super helpful.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. You know, what I'm struck by, in hearing your story, there's a couple of things that I'm really struck by. You know, when we think of resources, in our culture, we have a tendency to have a very narrow view of that. In our culture, it's about status, power, and money, right? They all go together.
Mm,
And as I'm hearing you share your story, what I'm struck by, and again, we're going to get to the money because I'm sure everybody's wondering about money. What I'm struck by, we haven't even talked about money. And what I'm struck by is how wealthy you have been in your life with resources. resources, even your own internal resources. Like even when you were in these situations, the way that you were thinking about things, you were thinking about, okay, I belong here. And so if I belong here, I need to learn about this. And I recognize that this is going to open doors for my future self. And what is it that I need to do to prepare my future self for another life? It's amazing, like what this shows me, Dr. Darla, is just your incredible amount of internal wealth. And I'm just
Yeah.
really struck by that.
And I think also part of it is, for so much of my life, I either didn't have the safety net or somehow I was the safety net.
Mm-hmm,
And so when you don't have the safety net or you are the safety net, you learn how to figure it out.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right.
And so, and luckily I don't know if it was my parents, I don't know if it was the books I read, but something in my brain works that it turns into a game. Like, okay, how quickly, how smoothly, how recklessly can we figure this out?
I love that approach. We take it so seriously, right? And I'll use myself as an example, Dr. Darla, as I'm loving this. I'm loving this. It excites me to hear this because with making it a game, it makes it less personal, right? And it also makes it less serious and like life and death. And I can tell you that is not the way I navigated through the world. I recognize you and I share something, and what we share is this idea of, I did not have a safety net. And I recognized, if I'm going to figure this, I have to figure this out. It's me. The buck stops with me, and it's up to me to make it happen. And I had that same mentality you did. I think what was different is I recognized that I still lived in this mindset of scarcity and lived in this fear of not having enough. And it's serious and it's heavy. And I find it really refreshing the way you approach this, even as if it's a game. You tried things, you played with things. Did it get me closer to where I wanted to be? And I love that, because I know that, I have these conversations with my clients, and they take it. It's like a matter of life or death when it comes to talking about money.
Well, and maybe it's because I have food, I have a home, I have a family, a partner who loves me, I have my health. So, like, all this other stuff is just other stuff. So, maybe
Mhm.
because so many of my core needs are met and have been, when I got the chance to be in control, because I'm a control enthusiast. Well, maybe we'll get there. Um, I've downgraded myself from a control freak. I'm now a control enthusiast. I like it. Things go well when I have it, but I don't need it all the time.
I like it. I want to hear more about that. I tell you what, we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, I would love to hear more about, well, first of all, the control enthusiasts. And I'd like to hear more about your relationship to money and what it was. Like, one of the things that you do in life is you're a financial coach. You help people with their money, and you help them with their financial mindset. And I want to get into your book about how to afford everything. That is such a enough mindset, of an abundance mindset. Doesn't matter what you have or what you don't have, you can get what you want. And I love that idea. So let's take a quick break, and when we get back, I'd love to unpack that. Sound great? All
Sounds
right,
awesome.
we're going to take a quick break. You are with the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, your host, and our guest, Dr. Darla. We'll be right back. And we're back on the Empowered Living Zone with me, Dr. A, your host, and our guest, Dr. Darla. And we're going to just dive in, Dr. Darla. So let's start with hearing, like, what did you learn when you said, I got to figure this out? What are the things that you learned? Like, I often refer with my clients, I always talk about golden nuggets. Here's a golden nugget, put it in your pocket. Remember you have it. It'll remind you of the thing that's really important. So when you think about your own journey around money, like, what would you say were the golden nuggets that you extracted from your experience?
So I promise I'll get there, but it'll take me a second to get there.
Go for it.
So I read more than 100 money books, like probably about 40 when I was in college. And then I just kept reading them because then I was interested in how people talked about money. And what I figured out from all of these books is there's really only 3 ways to manage your money. Like they all say the same thing. So live below your means, be careful with debt. Now, depending on the author and their views about debt, some say, avoid debt, it's the devil. And some say debt is your friend if you use it responsibility, and all the things in between. And save for the future. So 3 things: live below your means, careful with debt, and save for the future. How they explain to do it, what order they say to do it, change a little bit, but those 3 core things are in every money book. If you read a book that doesn't have it, it's not a money book, it's a something else book. But what so many of these books were missing for me, for my life, is as somebody who was charting what felt like to me my own path, a completely new trail, they didn't tell me where to start and what to do next. I needed okay, step 1, then step 2, then step 3. And of those 100 and some odd books, only a 7.5, and I say half because one book almost got you there, but stopped a little short. And then the second thing is so many of the books talked about why I was in a bad space with money and how it was my fault or I made bad decisions. And that wasn't my reality. Actually, if you looked at the stuff I came from, I should have a parade for the things that I've figured out and accomplished and overcome and don't even talk about anymore. And I didn't love that after I paid for a book, or real talk, got it from the library, that you're telling me I've made bad decisions, because that's not true. And that's not true of the women and the men who came before me who taught me about money. They just didn't have enough, or they didn't have the information, or they didn't have the tools, or they didn't have the community. And so I wanted to talk about money the way that felt good for me, where it is uplifting and fun, because for me, money is fun. I've had no money, I've had a little bit of money, I have a little bit more now, and I'm having a lot more fun now. So come with me. I want people to come with me.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's interesting, and I think about my own money journey. And I'm wondering how many people have had this experience, because again, I'm just in awe with your approach. It's uplifting, it's fun, it's refreshing. I know for me, in my own struggles around money, and when I say struggles around money, it's here. It wasn't my actual resources, it was up here. And one of the things that I recognized in myself is that I equated my own value to what I made. And so
Mm-hmm.
if I wasn't making enough, then I had shame. Like I felt like it was equated to who I was as a human and my own value. And so what's interesting is you talk about this, I can actually literally feel you separate this. Like money is just a thing. Money is not a statement about who you are. Money is not a reflection of your value as a human or how you contribute to the world. And I think that's really important for the listeners to get. Money is just a thing. It's a thing that we use. It's not a reflection of who we are or our value.
And that working with money is a skill that you can learn, right? And the other thing, and I don't think I talked about this when you asked me about what was that moment or those moments for me. One of the things I also realized when I was a college freshman and I was talking to my classmates, and I noticed they had a completely different way of thinking about, using, talking about money. And I tried to ask them, like, oh, so what do your parents do? And did you work in high school? And, do you have a savings account? And they'd be like, you are really weird. Why are you asking these questions? And I realized that as they were also 17, 18, so they didn't have a sense of what that they grew up any different. The way you grow up is the way you grow up, right? Until someone tells you that, oh no, we do things differently. That's why like that first sleepover when you're like 8 or 10 is like life changing. You're like, at their house they have this kind of towel or they eat this kind of food, right? And so what it made me understand is that the other people around me weren't thinking about it so cerebrally, right? Like I was really like trying to get the answer. I was like, no, I need to learn this money stuff. And they were like, we're just living our lives. Like, why are you asking these really detailed questions? That's strange. And I think part of it for me was I wanted to know the answer. I just wanted to know the answer because I knew there was an answer. And I also knew that those 17 or 18-year-olds who came to the same university, who had completely different home lives and cars and money in the bank and could go out to eat and weren't worried about buying their books, or they just called their parents for money, that they weren't any better or worse than me. And so how could money be the thing that makes us good or bad? Especially because I know so many good people who didn't have nothing. What do they say? A pot to pee in? They didn't have that, right? But were good and wonderful and kind and intelligent, but just whatever life brought them through didn't allow them to live in a different way. And so money can't be the thing.
Mm-hmm. Say more about that. When you say money can't be the thing, what does that mean?
Because you were earlier, you were saying, like, oh, like, wow, money isn't the thing that creates value as you as a person. Exactly. Money isn't the thing. Now, money is really helpful because if you have enough of it, whatever that means for you right now, because for some people, you might need lots and lots of money to live your life. Like me, I've got some kids. Our daycare bill is ridiculous. Summer camp will start soon. We're already thinking about what summer camp is going to cost and be like and what our plan is for that. And some people who maybe are single and younger and didn't have a lot of student loan debt, what they need is smaller. And so it's one of those things where if you can understand that money will ebb and flow,
Mm-hmm.
and that if you know how to work with those ebbs and flows, that it'll all be okay.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. Yeah. And again, you're not taking any of this personally. It's not a reflection of who you are. You said something about reading your books, and it's interesting. First of all, you read 100 books and it boiled down to three things. It's like, okay, now the listeners don't have to read 100 books. They got the answer from you. The second thing is, and I think this is part of our culture, is if you're experiencing some kind of hardship, and in this example, we're talking about financial hardship, not having money, you're blamed for it. You're blamed and
Oh,
shamed. You must have done
yes.
something wrong. There must be something wrong with you that you don't have this. And it sounds like you got very clear. And it's like, that is not me. That is not my story. And, we won't use any bad words, but basically, that doesn't resonate for me. I'm moving on. And again, I think that's really important for listeners to hear, that this is not a reflection of their value, nor is it any reason to feel shame if you don't have something. Yet, and I think people get stuck there, and that's where they get stuck. And so when they get stuck there, they're using all of their internal resources to fight that battle versus what I hear in your approach, Dr. Darla, where it's like, I just got to find the answer.
Yes.
I know there's an answer here. I want to find it. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly it. And two, on top of that, that it does not serve you. I can't think of any situation. And I've lived 17 lives. We didn't talk about this, but I'm a military spouse. So because I'm a military spouse, we move every 2.7 years. So every 2.7 years, my life changes in ways that are sometimes expected and sometimes unexpected. And so that means I've lived 17 different lives as a grown up alone. And what that has taught me too is that, like, if I've lived 17 different lives and they all look different, what neighborhoods we lived in and what resources were available, that wasn't in my control. The Army told me to live there. And so it's kind of the same is true with your parents, right? The people who raised you decided where you were going to live and whether that was a resource rich or resource not so rich environment. And so, but you also have to be, it's weird because you also have to be of two minds, right? You have to, one, acknowledge that there are these systems that were not built for you to succeed, and that you are in the part of the system that is making it harder for you to succeed. But at the same time, take control of the things you can control. And a few of the things you can control, no matter how much money, what your parents or the grown-ups or the people around you are doing, is like how you talk to yourself. And then that also can help you shape what you think about yourself. And then what things you can do and take action on. So that but it's weird because it's like, wait, I don't have control, but I do have control. And you have to live in both spaces. And there is a push and pull there.
I'm kind of curious. I'm going to go off in a little bit of a direction that, whether it's intended or not, I'm curious about this. we're talking about mindset. We're talking about, our relationship to money, how we think about money, that kind of thing. And, one of the things that I said as I introduced you and is that, and I don't know, you're gonna, maybe you'll get a kick out of this or a chuckle. It's interesting when you come up with podcast episodes, you want to get titles that are going to get people's attention. Well, my title was Money Can Kill You.
It can.
And I want you to speak to that, because I know that is something that is part of your wisdom, and what you share is the connection to money and health, whether it's mental or physical. And I would love for you to share what you have learned about the connections between money and health.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm trained in public health. And one of the things that was groundbreaking, about 20 years ago at this point, was that how much your zip code controls your health. So where you live, and there's actually databases that if you tell me the zip code you grew up in, I can estimate with really strangely good accuracy your credit score, your average life expectancy, and which diseases you are likely to encounter over the course of your life.
Oh my goodness.
Because 20% of the things that happen in your health happen when you're talking with the healthcare system, your doctor, your nurse, the hospital, what have you. But 80% is determined by where you live, the air you're breathing, the water you're drinking, what food you're eating or not, how much physical activity you have access to and are able to engage in, whether you have green spaces and places to take care of your mental health and mental well-being, if you live in a community that feels good and happy to walk through, or scary and sad to walk through, if the schools in that community are teaching you things that will help you live a great life, or not so much teaching you things because they're managing too many kids and not enough resources. Like, all of those things stack up. And so if you start your life, there are studies that show even if you start your life before the age of 6, if you have exposure to books, any visit to a zoo or museum, your long-term life outcomes and health outcomes are much stronger than kids who are never exposed to books or have a much lower exposure to books. And it's just because it opens up your brain to what other things might be in the world. And if your environment doesn't show you anything but one type of family or one type of way of living, you don't have any context for, oh, this is all relative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's
Wow.
why money or lack thereof can kill you, because you literally could be living in an environment that is making you sick, and that stacks up to continue to make you sick.
Wow. Wow. So that's how money is connected to all this. It's funny. I wish I would have had more enough foresight to give you my zip code and tell me my
We could do it live. I've got another screen.
Do you want to do it? Let's do it. You ready?
Okay. All right. I'm picking up I'm going to, this is the financial health index. I'm pulling it up.
You tell me when you're ready. And by the way, I've lived in this zip code for 25 years, so that might also help too.
Okay, financial wellness index. I'm almost there. It's loading. It's loading.
All right.
Okay.
You ready?
Zip code. Yep.
80602.
All right, got it. Let's see. So according to this, oh, posh. The average credit score for your zip code is 737. That is a very good credit score. So what that means is that, other than cancer, which everybody gets cancer thanks to our food system, you probably have much lower rates of chronic conditions. So these are things like diabetes, asthma, and checking one more thing here. Yep, life expectancy above average at 73 years old.
Wow. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. So I'm going to see if you can, because this might be a stretch a little bit. Tell me how money is at the core of that. Like, you got my zip code, you got my information. Tell me how money would be at the core of this, what you've shared with me.
So what determines where you live? How much rent or mortgage you can pay?
Right.
Unless in the off chance you are living with a relative who maybe is just in a different station or stage of life. And so because how much you can pay in rent or mortgage determines where you live,
Mm-hmm.
and the way that we fund our school systems in the country are determined on the tax basis that also determines what type of education you get. So if you live in an area that is really well, where most people have higher incomes, that also probably means that their property values are higher, which means the taxes that fund the schools are higher. So the schools have better facilities, perhaps better teacher student ratios, perhaps more programming. Whereas if you live in an environment where after years or decades of devaluing those properties, the tax base is very low, the schools are likely under resourced and underfunded. So even though you're only 5 miles apart, the way that you're experiencing education is completely different.
Wow. Wow. That is amazing. It just shows how things are compounded. You know what it makes me think of? In my world as a psychologist, we often talk about the first 5 years of your life determines who you become, right? The conditioning and all of that determines who you become. And some level there's almost like a parallel with this is, what zip code you live in is really going to determine almost a trajectory for you. Not that you don't have free will and choice to jump off that trajectory, but it's like whatever happens as you're going to school, you're going to elementary school, it really does create that trajectory.
It does. And so you have to work that if it's not a great trajectory to figure out how to jump off, like you said.
Right.
And that
Right.
part is tough. That part is hard because when you make that decision, just because you've made the decision to jump off doesn't mean you know exactly what happens once you do it.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly. Which, it's funny, whether this was necessarily intended, but you did a great job here. We're coming full circle, right? And the full circle is you being at college and going, I need to know the answer. I know that I'm going in a different direction. I'm opening different doors and I wanted to know the answer. And I'm curious, let's go back to the answer. What is the answer to all of this when it comes to money, health, when it comes to financial well-being? Like what is the golden nugget? What is the thing that you think is important for the listeners to hear?
That you have more control than you think. But in order to take full advantage of that control, you have to be able to imagine what you really want your life to feel like, look like, be like. And if you haven't been exposed to a bunch of different stories, it's hard to do that. Right. And so if you can think about, okay, and this is a silly example, but it works so well. I was talking to someone, they said, well, since you're going to teach me how to afford everything, how do I convince my wife to let me get a boat? And I was like, well, okay, let's talk about it. I said, what is it about the boat? Tell me why a boat. Is it because when you're on a boat, that's when you feel so happy? You're relaxed, you're fishing, the wind in your hair, the smell of the water, the sound of people having a good time. Is it that when you're on a boat, that's when you're with all the people you love? That's the only time you know that all your siblings are going to hop in on the boat. You're going to see all the nieces and nephews. Your parents will hop on, even if they don't do much. They just kind of sit on the dry part of the boat. Like, what is it about the boat? And because if you can tell me what it is about the boat, let's go get that thing. It's not the boat. It's that you want to go spend time with your family. So guess what you're going to do? You're going to put on your calendar to go visit each of your siblings this year. Make a plan and commit to it. If it's that you want to have the family together, then plan some freaking parties. Tell the family we're having a party. It's on this date. My expectation as the sibling who is putting this party together is that everybody's here and everybody gets along for the 3 hours of this party because this is really important to me. So
Mm-hmm.
go after the actual thing that you want. And if the boat is the only way you can get it, fine, we'll figure out the boat. But I don't suspect that the boat's the only way.
Got it. Got it. Now, and I would imagine there's got to be listeners out there saying, what does this have to do with money? The example that you
Everything, all of it.
make the connection, Dr. Darla, make that connection. How does it have to do with everything?
It has to do with everything because money is in this society. We could have decided that we were going to focus on gardening and beauty and love and togetherness, but instead we've made money the currency. So lean into that, right? And so if the things that we want, the way that we get the safe, clean home the way that we have the safe, reliable car, the way that we have the grocery store that we like is by having enough money,
Mm-hmm.
because that's
Mm-hmm.
how we build our society. And so that's how it's all connected. And so thinking about money as the tool, as your friend, as something you could take advantage of versus the enemy that can help you get there. One of the things I have people do when we're first starting, they have some feelings about their money. It's not going right. I can't afford anything. I'm tired. I work all the time, but I feel like I can't just get ahead. I'm behind. I say, okay, if you had to describe money like a person, let's give them a name. What's their name? Roger. Okay, Roger's the money's name. How would you describe this? If you were introducing Roger to someone that's never met Roger the money before, how would you describe them? And personifying the money helps you understand what you think about money.
Mm-hmm.
And money's
Yeah.
my best friend. My best friend takes me to places that I've never been to before. My best friend solves problems for me.
Oh my goodness. That's a great exercise. It's really enlightening because it will tell you what you think about it, right? It will.
And that if the way that you're thinking about it is based off of your past, like that's valid. And there are ways to change it. One of the easiest ways to change anything in your life, whether it's about money, whether it's about stress, whether it's about how you feel about your job, whether it's about how you feel about your parents, is to change the way you talk about it. Because sometimes the brain actually needs you to trick it into working the way you need it to work for you. And so when you talk, when you speak, your ears hear the words you say, whether you think you're paying attention to the words you say or not. And that is incredibly powerful, because having those words and those messages come out of your mouth, even if you don't believe it yet, I am wealthy, money is my friend, I'm getting there, I'm closer than ever. Having your brain hear those things from the outside in helps to create new synapses, helps to create new pathways in the way that your brain thinks about money or your job or whatever it is that we're paying attention to how we talk. And so that as you are on your journey to change your mindset to something that actually helps you, so that you don't have to feel so sad and depressed all the time, talking and paying attention to how you talk matters. And this is one of the things that I actually realized helped me so much when I was in college, working too many jobs, because that's how I figured out. I figured out I needed X amount of money every week to be able to pay my bills, to be able to help my mom because she did eventually get released from prison, and to be able to save money because I knew I wanted to be able to go to graduate school wherever I wanted and not being able to afford to move get in my way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I worked a ton. And my friends would be like, "Oh, are you going to come to the party, Darla?" I'm like, "No, I got to work." They're like, "We know you'd rather be tired than broke." Or, "Darla, are you going on a road trip with us?" "No, I got to work." "Oh, we know you'd rather be tired than broke." And what I realized is that my friends had heard me say I'd rather be tired than broke so much that they were repeating it back to me. And even though they were doing it with an eye roll, they were like reinforcing, like, right, remember, you have a goal. You're working towards your goal. Your goal means that you're going to be, you'd rather be tired than broke right now. It doesn't have to be for the rest of your life. It doesn't have to be till you're old. Just right now, because you're working towards a goal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great, great. Well, I know we need to take another break. And when we get back from the break, I want to hear about your book about how to afford everything. Like it's interesting. It's funny. I imagined our conversation today, and I've had our conversation has been full of lots of surprises, and they're exciting, and they make me excited about where we might go with this. And so I'm curious about what you're going to share when we get back from the break regarding, how to afford everything, and what is the thing that you want to leave our listeners with. And we'll take a quick break. So we're going to take a quick break. This is the Empowered Living Zone. We'll be right back, and we'll talk more about this. Hello, everyone. We're back on the Empowered Living Zone with me, your host, Dr. A, and our guest, Dr. Darla. And we're just going to dive in, ask the $1 million question. Before we get into the $1 million question, Dr. Darla, what's really clear to me from our conversation today is this is really about what's going on up here versus what's in here. I mean, you said a lot of things that I think are really enlightening, and it's really all about perspective. Like one of the things that I love that you said today, and this is my translation of this, is it's so important to have imagination. It's like what's really, it's less important about how much money is in your hand and much more important about what can you imagine, what can you see as possibility. I just see this expansiveness, and that's what's really important. So instead of hanging back on what you already know or what you've already experienced around money, it really comes down to shifting this perspective in front of you, expanding, approaching it from a place of playfulness and curiosity as a game, rather than looking at it from what we've experienced from past. And so I think that's really important, that this really comes down to mindset, and it comes down to perspective. Having said this, I'm sure I would imagine many of the listeners are like, okay, I've been listening to this whole time, and I want to walk away with knowing the answer, the $1 million question, how to afford everything. So, when you think about the takeaway, again, I talk about the golden nuggets. What's important to you? Like, what is your message? What do you want the listeners? What is your message to the world? And what do you want people to know about money?
That it is a tool, and that the skills you need, you can absolutely learn, even if nobody up until this point taught them to you. And that if I'm not the teacher for you, there are literally hundreds of other money teachers who might sound the way you need them to sound, or who might use the words that make sense to you. But if money is something that you feel like you just don't have right, treat it like a skill to be learned. Go and study, because you can absolutely study this stuff.
Okay. And what
And
is
that
the,
if you grew up poor,
go
if you
ahead.
grew up poor, you actually have an advantage. Growing up poor, you actually know a lot more about money than folks who grew up not poor. So take that to the bank, like literally, like, okay, if we figured out how to live without money, I for dang sure can figure out how to live with it.
Right. That's a great perspective. I don't think people don't look at it that way, right? Like there's a gift. There's a gift in growing up poor.
Uh,
You have more awareness.
yeah. I mean, I don't know if I would have chosen the gift if I had the option, but since I had it, I might as well work with it.
Dr. Darla, I'm off on a tangent here. Do you know what I call those, by the way? I call them terrible gifts. I like that idea of terrible gifts. They really suck, but you get something good out of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how do people afford everything? That's your book.
Yes, the very first thing to do is, if your money's all over the place or it's just not where you want it to be, is sit down and look at your bank account, your credit card statements, and your Venmo feed, or whichever electronic transfer system you use. Scroll through them and figure out where your money actually went for the past 90 days, so about 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
and be very curious about it, because you might figure out, oh, that's why we don't have any money. We ate out a lot, or we forgot about that birthday, or we had that emergency. And then, because you now have that information, you might do things just slightly differently for the next 90 days that hopefully makes things smoother.
Great, great. Well, Dr. Darla, thank you so much for sharing your story and your wisdom and your upliftment. I think that's really important. I love the upliftment. Before we wrap up, how can listeners connect with you or get a hold of you if they'd like to work with you?
So the easiest way to find me is going to howtoaffordeverything.com.
Great, great. Well, thank you again, Dr. Darla. This has been fun. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, share it with others who might benefit from the discussion. If you want to work with me personally, you're able to contact me through my website as well, which is www.empoweredlivingcoaching.com. And until the next time, stay empowered and take good care of yourself. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the Empowered Living Zone show with me, Dr. A, to create the life you crave. Tune in on the first and third Tuesdays at noon Pacific Time on transformationtalkradio.com and get ready for another show. Say yes to creating positive and empowering change in your life and move beyond life's challenging terrain into the zone of success. Be ignited by spirit, fueled by purpose, and guided by vision in the empowered living zone. For more information on how to do deep transformational work with me and to create the life you crave, visit empoweredlivingcoaching.com. That's empoweredlivingcoaching.com. See you next time.